acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. At the end of this service, as in all the services of the church, the priest will say, "Go in peace to love and serve the Lord." And the congregation replies, "Thanks be to God." Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. These words are very appropriate for this Labor Day weekend, because labor is about work, paid work, but labor is also about a larger concept of work. It's work that comes from one's center, comes from one's core. There are different words for this. Some people call it purpose. Some people call it vocation. Some people call it mission. Some people call it one's gift. But in the larger sense, the labor we do, in the best sense, is not just for money. It is an expression of our deepest core values. This theme is expressed in the dismissal words of the service, "Go in peace to love and serve the Lord." It's also expressed at the prayer of communion at the end of the communion service, when the priest prays that God will send us out to do the work you have given us to do. To do the work you have given us to do. And in the service of baptism, the prayer is, "Send them forth to perform service, the service that you set before them." And one thing that may have struck you as I was reading these various expressions of service and go and serve the Lord is that none of these are exactly a job description. These are somewhat lacking in specificity. And so I think the question we sometimes have is, if there is a gift, if there is a purpose, if there is a mission, if all people have this, does it exist? And also, what is my purpose, my gift, my mission? What is it that God has uniquely fashioned me to do? More than 30 years ago, I became fascinated by the subject of whether something like a vocation actually exists, whether each person really is gifted by God to perform a particular service uniquely designed for that individual. Does vocation actually exist? I spent one Saturday morning investigating this question while I was kneeling on a mural and watching the artists of that mural put in each individual tile to complete the mural. I was there with that artist named Jim Hubble in San Diego with my tape recorder, recording the conversation, and asking him questions like, "How do you feel when you do this work? Have you always wanted to do this? Is this something which has been in your heart from the very beginning? What does it feel like to be engrossed in a work that you feel completely a part of, such as his work as an artist?" I also investigated during that same time one of the first women to break into the broadcasting field in San Diego, a woman named Kitty Johnson. And I interviewed her in her studio, she at one console and me at the other console, asking her the same kinds of questions. Is this work your vocation? How do you feel when you do the work? She shared with me an interesting story that before she broke into broadcasting, she had a job as an announcer in a supermarket. And she would announce the very sales of the day. And she said, "I knew at that time that this was not my work, but she said, I knew that it had something to do with what I was doing." And indeed, a few years later, she was a broadcaster in San Diego. I also read about people who seemed to be at one with their work, and the fact that from the very beginning, in many cases, they had that feeling. I read about a 17-year-old kid in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, who threw cranberries against his mother's kitchen wall and filmed the result with fascination as the cranberries sank down on the wall. The kid's name was Steven Spielberg, and you may have heard of him. I also read about a lady in Long Island, New York, in the 1950s, who struggled, as so many people do, struggled to keep her weight in check. And she tried all kinds of diets and all kinds of experiments with food. And finally, through trial and error, she discovered something that worked for her, that actually enabled her to lose weight. That lady was named Jean Nidich, and she was the founder of Weight Watchers, which has helped thousands, hundreds of thousands of people since then. As a result of all of this, I actually wrote a book about this called What I Really Want to Do. It was a book about vocation and finding your mission, finding your passion in life. But I also discovered that these same patterns of involvement were found in my own children when they became older. I remember my 10-year-old son looking at me one day and said, "Dad, I don't get it. What's a mortgage?" A 10-year-old is now in a business career, and it struck me at the time that very few 10-year-olds are interested in finding out what a mortgage is. I also noticed with our daughter that when we came home from work, her room was constantly rearranged. The bed, which had been on the east wall, was now on the west wall. The dresser, which had been against the north wall, was now on the south wall. That little girl grew up to design office spaces for commercial office buildings, including the World Trade Center towers and also the Empire State Building. And so the seeds of these interests were in them very beginning. And I have to believe that this has something to do with a sense of vocation, a sense of gifts. The one who probably has written more about this than anyone else is St. Paul. St. Paul speaks of the gifts of the Spirit given for the common good. In the book of Romans, he mentions gifts of generosity. We may not think of that necessarily as a gift, but some people are generous and some are not. Generosity and compassion as gifts of the Spirit. In Ephesians, he writes about teaching as being a gift, ministering as being a gift, being an apostle, being a prophet, all gifts of the Spirit. In the first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 13, he writes of varieties of gifts given for the common good. And he writes as follows, "Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of working, but it is the same God who inspires them all in every one. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good." This theme of each person having a gift is one that runs through the writings of St. Paul. And I had to wonder why this particular subject was so important for Paul. I did some research on his biography. The results are very interesting. Paul considered himself an apostle, but unlike the other apostles, he had not seen Jesus in the flesh. Their lives coincided, but he had never actually seen Jesus in the flesh. And so he must have wondered, although he claimed to be an apostle, whether he had the qualifications to be a true apostle. There's something else about Paul also. Paul had been a persecutor of the church. Paul had been rabid in his opposition to the Christians. And so both of these together must have made Paul wonder whether he was truly qualified to claim to be an apostle of the Lord. And then in Romans, he has an interesting insight. He realizes that his special gift is to be an apostle to the Gentiles. Now, the Gentiles were the outsiders of that time, outsiders to the Jewish religion. And so Paul sees himself as an apostle to the outsiders. He uses his own status as an outsider to be uniquely qualified to serve as an apostle to other outsiders, the Gentiles. He uses something that perhaps he believes he lacks as his own particular special gift. This past week, many of us have read about the actor Chadwick Boseman, who was the actor who starred in the Panther movies, the Black Panther movies. And 2 years ago, Boseman spoke at the commencement of his alma mater, Howard University of Washington, D.C. Boseman speaks of purpose, and I'd like to read this to you. He says, "Purpose crosses disciplines. Purpose is an essential element of you. It is the reason you are on this planet at this particular time of history. Remember, the struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose. Your very existence is wrapped up in the things that you are here to fulfill. The very reason you are here is wrapped up in the purpose of what you are here to fulfill." Wise words from this recently deceased actor. I'd like to close with a prayer which I have composed around those concluding words of the service. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Go in peace, bearing your own particular gifts and abilities, your deepest passions, your best impulses, your heartfelt desires for a better world, to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Go in peace, in spite of self-doubt, in spite of feelings of inadequacy, unexpected setbacks, discouragements, and momentary obstacles, to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen and amen.